French and Spanish are supposed to be close relatives. They both came from Latin. They both grew out of the Roman world. They both belong to the same Romance language family. So why do they sound so different? Spanish sounds clear, open, and easy to follow. French sounds smooth, elegant, and sometimes as if the words are melting into each other. Think about it. In Spanish, when you see a word like casa, amigo, or gracias, what you see is often close to what you say. The letters feel honest. The vowels are clear. The words come out strong. But French plays by different rules. You can see a word full of letters, then hear someone say it, and suddenly half of those letters seem to disappear. Endings go silent. Words connect. Vowels move through the nose. A sentence can flow so smoothly that beginners may struggle to know where one word ends and the next one begins. So what happened? How did two languages born from the same Latin roots become so different in sound, rhythm, spelling, and personality? The answer is not just about pronunciation. It is about history, geography, invasion, culture, and the small speech habits people pass down for centuries without even thinking about it. And if you enjoy simple explanations about language, culture, and history, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you more fascinating stories like this. By the end of this video, you will understand why Spanish feels direct and open, while French feels smooth, stylish, and sometimes almost impossible to predict. Let's get started. And Spanish are not strangers. They are family. Both languages came from Latin, the language spoken by the Romans long ago. So, in a simple way, you can think of French and Spanish as two children from the same parent language. But when you hear them today, they do not sound the same at all. Spanish often sounds open and clear. You hear the vowels, you hear the letters. Words like casa, amigo, gracias, and familia are easy to follow, even if you do not speak Spanish. The sounds come out strongly, one after another, almost like each part of the word wants to be heard. French feels different. French can sound soft, smooth, and flowing. Some letters are written but not spoken. Some words seem to disappear at the end. Some sounds pass through the nose. One word can connect to the next, making the whole sentence feel like water moving instead of separate blocks. That is why many learners say Spanish feels easier at first, while French feels beautiful but confusing. But here is the real question. How did this happen? If both languages came from Latin, why did one become clearer and more direct, while the other became smoother, softer, and harder to predict? The answer is not because one language is better than the other. It is because languages change when people move, mix, speak fast, borrow words, and pass habits from one generation to another. French and Spanish started from the same Roman roots, but they grew up in different places, around different people, with different sounds. And the story begins in a time when these two languages were not yet French or Spanish, but different local versions of the Latin spoken by ordinary people across the Roman world. The story begins when Rome controlled huge parts of Europe. At that time, French and Spanish did not exist yet. People were not saying, "I speak French," or "I speak Spanish." Instead, many people across the Roman world were speaking Latin. But here is the important part. It was not always the perfect Latin you might imagine from old books, churches, or official speeches. Ordinary people had their own everyday Latin. Soldiers spoke it, traders spoke it, farmers spoke it. Families used it in markets, homes, streets, and villages. Think of it like English today. The English used in a school textbook is not always the same as the English people speak at home, in the street, or with friends. Latin worked in a similar way. As Roman soldiers, settlers, and officials spread across Europe, this everyday Latin traveled with them. In the area that later became France, people learned Latin in their own local way. In the area that later became Spain, people also learned Latin, but with different local habits and accents. At first, these versions of Latin were close enough to feel connected. They came from the same source. They shared many words. They followed similar patterns. If you could listen to them long ago, you might hear that they belonged to the same family. But languages do not stay frozen. People pronounce words differently. Children copy the speech around them. Local sounds influence foreign words. Over time, small changes become bigger changes. One region keeps certain sounds, another region drops them. One area speaks more clearly at the end of words, another softens them. That is how French and Spanish began their journey apart. They started as relatives from the same spoken Latin, but the places where they grew up changed them. And the first big difference becomes clear when you listen to Spanish, because Spanish kept many sounds open, strong, and easier to hear. Now let's look at Spanish, because this is where the difference becomes easy to hear. Spanish kept many of its sounds open, clear, and direct. When you see a Spanish word, there is a good chance you can guess how it should be spoken, even if you are still learning. The letters usually do not hide from you. They show up. They do their job. Take a word like casa. You see 4 letters, and you hear the word clearly. Casa. The vowels are open. The sound is simple. Nothing feels trapped or swallowed. Now think of amigo. Again, the word comes out smoothly, but every part still feels present. Me, go. You can hear the beginning, the middle, and the ending. This is one reason Spanish often feels easier for beginners. The vowels are strong and steady. The letter A usually sounds like A. The letter O usually sounds like O. Spanish does not change its sounds as much as some other languages, so learners feel more confident reading it aloud. Words like gracious and familia also show this clearly. They sound bright, open, and full. Spanish often gives you the feeling that each syllable has its own space. It moves forward in a clear rhythm, almost like footsteps. One sound, then another, then another. That does not mean Spanish is always easy. It still has fast speakers, rolled R sounds, grammar rules, and regional accents. But compared to French, Spanish spelling and pronunciation often feel more predictable. So, if Spanish kept many sounds open and easy to hear, what happened to French? That is where the story becomes even more interesting, because French took a very different path. Instead of keeping every sound strong and separate, French began to soften, connect, hide, and reshape the way words were spoken. Now French is where the story takes a surprising turn. If Spanish feels like the letters are standing clearly in front of you, French can feel like some of them are hiding behind the curtain. You may look at a French word and think, wait, where did all those letters go? That is because French changed more dramatically over time. In French, many final letters are written but not spoken. A word can end with a consonant on paper, but when someone says it, that sound may disappear. This is one reason beginners often feel confused. The word looks longer than it sounds. Then there are nasal vowels. These are sounds that partly come through the nose. For example, in many French words, the letters on, en, on, or in do not sound the way an English or Spanish learner might expect. The sound becomes softer, deeper, and more rounded. French also loves connected speech. Words do not always stand alone like separate blocks. They often link together, especially when one word ends and the next begins with a vowel sound. So instead of hearing each word clearly separated, you may hear a smooth chain of sounds flowing together. That is why French can feel elegant, but also difficult. But here is the important thing. French did not become this way by accident. People shaped it slowly through everyday speaking. Over many centuries, speakers softened sounds, dropped endings, connected words, and changed pronunciation little by little. Children copied what they heard, then their children copied them, and the language kept moving. So French is not strange. It simply followed its own path. And now that you understand why Spanish sounds open while French sounds smoother and more hidden, the next step is to compare them side by side, because that is where the difference becomes impossible to miss. Now let's do a simple sound test, because this is where you can really feel the difference between French and Spanish. Remember, many French and Spanish words come from the same Latin roots. That means they may have started from similar old words, but today they often sound like they have completely different personalities. Take the idea of nation. In Spanish, You get nación. The word feels open. You can hear the ending clearly. The sound moves forward in a strong and direct way. In French, the word is nation too, but it does not hit the ear the same way. It sounds softer, smoother, and more compressed. The spelling may look familiar, but the sound feels different. Now look at important. In Spanish, importante gives you a full ending. You hear more of the word. It has weight and shape. In French, important becomes much softer at the end, and some of what you see on the page is not fully heard when spoken. The same happens with family. Spanish says familia, open and clear. French says famille, shorter and softer. One feels like it opens its mouth wide. The other feels like it closes the sound gently. Even school shows the difference. Spanish has escuela, with clear syllables you can follow. French has école, smoother and shorter. And hospital is another good example. Spanish hospital keeps a strong, direct shape. French hospital sounds more polished, but also more changed. So here is the pattern. Spanish often keeps words fuller, clearer, and easier to separate. French often compresses, softens, and hides parts of the sound. That is why Spanish can feel like walking on clear steps, while French feels like gliding across a smooth floor. And once you hear that, the next difference becomes even more powerful. Spanish and French do not just pronounce words differently. They move with completely different rhythm. And if you're enjoying this so far, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let's continue uncovering why French and Spanish sound so different. Let's continue. Now listen to the rhythm, because this is one of the easiest ways to feel the difference between French and Spanish. Spanish often moves like clear footsteps. One sound comes after another. The syllables are easy to notice. When someone says a Spanish word, you can often hear the parts clearly, almost like they are being placed on the table one by one. Casa, amigo, familia, importante. Each syllable has space. That is why Spanish can sound bright, energetic, and direct. Even when people speak quickly, the language still has a strong beat. It can feel like music with a clear drum behind it. You may not understand every word, but you can often follow the movement. French moves differently. French does not always treat every word like a separate piece. Instead, words often flow together in groups. Some endings become quiet. Some sounds connect to the next word. Some letters disappear from your ears even though they are still written on the page. So French can feel smoother, softer, and more blended. Imagine Spanish, like walking up clear stairs. Step, step, step. You can feel each movement. Now imagine French like sliding across a smooth floor. The movement is beautiful, but the edges are harder to catch. That is why beginners sometimes say Spanish sounds easier to follow, while French sounds more elegant but less obvious. Spanish gives you clear blocks. French gives you a stream. Neither one is better. They simply move differently. And once you understand the rhythm, you start to understand why learners often react to them in completely different ways. Spanish may feel friendly at the beginning because the sounds are easier to separate. French may feel mysterious because the language asks your ear to listen more carefully. But sound is only one part of the story. The next big question is the one many learners secretly want answered. Which one is actually easier to learn? Let's continue exploring. For most beginners, Spanish usually feels easier at the start. The reason is simple. Spanish often speaks the way it looks. When you see a word like casa, amigo, or familia, the letters guide you clearly. The vowels are strong. The endings are usually heard. The sounds do not hide as much. That gives learners confidence. Even if you are just starting, you can look at many Spanish words and make a good attempt at saying them. You may not sound perfect, but you are not completely lost. The spelling gives you a path to follow. French asks for a different kind of patience. A French word may look full on the page, but when spoken, some letters disappear. Endings become quiet. Words connect to each other. Vowels can sound nasal. So instead of reading every letter clearly, you have to listen for patterns. That is why French can feel confusing at first. Your eyes see one thing, but your ears hear something else. For example, a beginner may look at a French sentence and expect every written letter to appear in speech. But French does not work that way. It flows, it links, it softens. It sometimes hides sounds that are still visible in spelling. But this does not mean Spanish is easy and French is impossible. Spanish also has challenges: fast speakers, verb changes, gender rules, and different accents across countries. French also becomes easier once your ear adjusts to its rhythm. So the fair answer is this: Spanish is usually easier to enter, while French often takes longer to feel natural. But difficulty is only one part of the story, because after comparing the sound, rhythm, spelling, and learning experience, we can finally answer the bigger question: what really makes French and Spanish different, even though they came from the same family? French and Spanish are not strangers. They come from the same family. Both were born from Latin. Both carry the memory of the Roman world, and both still share words, grammar patterns, and deep historical roots. But they are not twins. They are more like cousins who grew up in different homes. Spanish grew in a way that kept many sounds open, clear, and easier to hear. Its words often feel full. Its vowels stand strong. Its rhythm moves forward with energy, almost like every syllable wants its own space. French took another path. It softened many endings, connected words together, created nasal sounds, and turned speech into something smoother and more flowing. That is why French can sound elegant, mysterious, and sometimes difficult to predict. So when people ask why French and Spanish sound so different, the answer is simple. They started from the same root, but history shaped them differently. Different lands, different people, different accents, different habits, passed from parents to children for hundreds of years. And over time, those small differences became big enough to create two languages with completely different personalities. Spanish often feels bright, direct, and open. French often feels smooth, stylish, and hidden. One does not have to be better than the other. They are beautiful in different ways. Spanish may welcome beginners faster because the spelling and sound are more predictable. French may take more patience, but once your ear adjusts, its rhythm has a charm that is hard to ignore. That is what makes language so fascinating. It is not just words, it is history you can hear. Now I want to hear from you. Which language sounds better to you? French or Spanish? And which one do you think is harder to learn? Drop your answer in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who loves languages. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.